Okay, welcome back to the summit. Martha Thorne will moderate the second panel discussion this afternoon, and I'd like to introduce Martha. You might all know her, but still I believe, I would like to say a few words about Martha. Okay, Martha, she is the general coordinator of IAES. She led the organization also of the second IAES in Madrid at the IE School of Architecture, where she is also the Vice Dean for External Relations. Martha is also the Executive Director of the Pritzker Architecture Prize, a position she has held since 2005. She worked with a variety of prestigious international cultural institutions, including as Associate Curator of the Department of Architecture at the Art Institute of Chicago from 1996 to 2005. Martha is the editor and author of several publications, including the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the first 20 years. Martha, the floor is yours. I'm looking forward to the next inspiring discussion.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to briefly introduce the panel. And I think rather than read the CVs that you can find in your book, we can abbreviate it, jump right into their presentations, and so we can jump right into dialogue with questions and answers from the audience. Of course, one of our first speakers, Hubert Klumpner, and we all know him as co-director of an architecture chair in architecture and urban design, and also the dean at ETH in Zurich. He's an architect who works not only in building but also research, as exemplified in the recent award from the Venice Biennale in architecture last year. We're lucky to have Elena Agudio. She is not an architect, but she is an artistic leader in the platform for art and neuroscience in Berlin. And this is a person who works very directly bringing together studies and researchers in the field of neuroscience and applying their knowledge along with the knowledge and experience of artists in the field. So she'll be able to give us some specific examples of interdisciplinary work. And Chris Luebkeman is, of course, Director for Global Foresight and Innovation at Arup. Chris is an architect, an engineer, and has also worked in the last, I believe he said 15 years in the field of commercial architecture. And Chris, you can explain a little bit more about what you do because it is a very broad background and touches many facets of architecture and through a major practice such as Arup. And then I just wanted to announce that Marcos Cruz, because of illness in his family, he was unable at the last minute to join us. He emailed us yesterday and very cordially, Javier Quintana, Dean at IE School of Architecture and friend, offered to jump in or was roped into jumping in. But Javier is an architect with his own practice. He is also has a long career as an educator and also works with major firms now in London. He's somebody that was in Segovia 2 years ago and was on a panel about interdisciplinary architecture. So as our respondent, he is no stranger to this field. So without further ado, I'll ask Hubert to make his presentation. And I'm strict, but I won't pull the plug. Okay.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Hitoshi. Christine, Hans-Jürgen, and Dietmar for having me as my presentation opens up. Perhaps a few words. After having lived in South America for almost 15 years, I would say, to start with, I would like to introduce the notion that the revolution is not necessarily happening anymore where the education takes place. And in the same way that interdisciplinary work might suggest that architects are at the center of it, it could also mean that architects actually are drawn away from their core business of construction, building houses and cities, and participating in other groups of non-architects and non-building. In that sense, I would say the university, talking about students and the place of the university, today hubs of exchange and freedom. What else are they? I think they should be more garage projects than big institutions. And in that sense, they can provide, I think, in a wide range, choice and opportunity. Being in Switzerland, and we already heard, a neutral country, I learned also, because I'm not from Switzerland, that neutral could also mean being indifferent, unconcerned, or apathic to what's going on elsewhere. And that actually puts you in a very interesting situation, because you can react very differently to changes. You know, if you haven't participated in a lot of the mess that's going on in the world, you actually have about what we call 3 to 5 years of an advantage, making everybody believe that we know a bit more than others. What we haven't heard so far is actually the aspect of money that will be, in my presentation, almost obligatory a topic, being the Dean of the School of Architecture at the ETH of the Swiss Institute of Technology, because I think it's at the core of architecture. It is, what is the funding situation that you have available? Because if you look over the last century, the best architects have been produced in areas where they were at the forefront of where the action is. And this is actually building, constructing, and transforming our world. A few points that I prepared. I don't know how far I will come if I have to stop in 1, 2, 3, or 4, but it doesn't really matter. I use this presentation elsewhere and continue elsewhere. I met Larry Nung last week. He's somewhere here in the audience, and I was struck by his idea. This is Singapore, where he comes from. He told me Singapore is not interesting to the world as a model how it is today, but people who are really knowing about how it came that far, they want to know how they started to get rid of corruption, to get rid of the image of being a hothouse for gambling, prostitution, gangs and slums, and how it was actually the first step taken into another reality. And this is exactly what connects it with my reality, with South America, because we are Singapore 50, 60 years back. Let's not forget Caracas is an oil country. It's Dubai. It has been Dubai in the 50s with the largest growth rate in the world, but it has ended up in what you know now. I lived the revolution, the Bolivarian revolution, over the last 15 years in Venezuela, and I went to Switzerland, and I'm not bored there at all. I enjoy safety and security, I enjoy pragmatism, and I enjoy the availability of funding to the extent of disgust. But I can tell you, once you have it, you want more. And this is also why our team, and this is a picture from the Singapore Future City Lab, we have not doubled, but we have made something. We heard Eric Owen asking, could we not detach the university from this sort of rather concentrated, competitive idea of who is better, which is clearly connected again with the idea of economics, because the only reason why in research I want to be better than the other is to ensure patents. Once we get used to what everybody talks about, open source, and patents don't play a role anymore, sorry, I need something to drink. If we share that knowledge, then actually we can also work better together. And if you look at the students themselves, they have long adopted this idea. They're actually drifting between the US and China, they're drifting between Europe and I don't know where, and Africa, and the individual student is maybe in his curriculum already providing an answer of how the university of the future will look like. It is this hub, and you move like just on a permanent journey through hubs, and you collect whatever you can get and what you think is best for that. And this is also that I suggest that we bring the experiences from South Africa and India. This is a scene actually from Trinidad and Tobago, because I think students have to bring and have to be able today to be both bottom up and top down. I can tell you out of my own experience, I was extremely frustrated to live in Venezuela in an environment where no competitions as you know them, where no prizes, awards, and any of that exists, but where actually, if you look out of the window, if you go out of the street, probably the biggest challenge of 90% of the population exists, 90% who are not attended by architectural practice. And this is my second point. Emerging sustainable cities. We were able, Alfredo Brillembourg and myself, who's practically the co-dean under the constellation as we have it today, because we are very much thinking and acting together. Emerging and Sustainable Cities is an initiative of the Inter-American Development Bank. We were able in Switzerland to identify that the Swiss are co-owners of the Inter-American Development Bank. Quite interesting. That put us back home because we suddenly could work top-down into a system that we only knew too well bottom-up. And I can tell you, money exists, but it drops like meteorites on the wrong spots. Where else where actually projects are missing, collaborations could be provided, but they're not accepted, and financing is missing. That's the reality, and to bring that together is maybe one of the capacities of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary thinking, and that's certainly, and we heard it also today of Tatiana, a political role. And I think the insignificance of architects, let's face it, because we are not sustainable, we are insignificant, we are preaching to ourselves. Who is not an architect in this room? Well, I would say less than 10%. Architectural journalists don't count, and anybody else either. Okay. I just tell you, asking questions is fine, but I can tell you if we can't provide hard fact answers, we're out of the game. You know, the questions are only accepted as long as you realize that this is not about a master plan, but this is about a process. And we have a task of wayfinding, of pathfinding. We have a task also of communicating. We heard that before, certainly true. If we can communicate, architects actually stay in the realm of autism. Let's not forget, as much as a plan might speak to you, a lot of people who judge projects in the real world have no idea what it actually says. It is like the partitur to a conductor, right? He hears the music, somebody else might see funny signs. And this is also why we engaged in finding new ways of representation of architecture, also representation to laymen, and combining technical and scientific knowledge with architectural design. Again, the fact that sustainable architecture, be it a new building or be it the transformation of an existing city quarter, has been seen with such distance is that the aesthetics have very few times, in very few cases, matched with the knowledge, the expertise, scientifically and technically. And I think for that reason, this initiative that we are involved in, where we have managed the first time that federal money in Switzerland is distributed to the Ministry of Economics and to the ETH, has come together again, because now the Ministry of Economics is financing us at the ETH with extra funding that was not dedicated to us to work in South America and the Caribbean in this project. The next step is Barranquilla, and I can tell you the number of cities and the projects that are engaged in this program will provide work for generations of architects. The problem is that we have not managed to step into political activism to channel the money where the projects are. There's enough projects and there's enough money, but we have to explain and visualize and talk about that too. Because as long as architects make 350 projects alternatively for one single site, we're burning not only brain cells and lifetime, but also enormous resources. And you, at the end of the day, you all know that, but it's almost embarrassing to say it publicly. 1 minute, two? Two, I think I can make it. Initiative for Science, Technology and Policy, something else that we have started over the last year, starting my deanship. I think that within the university, the architecture department in a technical university like the Swiss Institute of Technology meant that we are actually sort of oddballs, right? Those are people who know about physics, about biology, about natural science. We have to ask ourselves, and there's clear answers connected with that in social science, how do we actually like our world to be? And that requires a very clear and pragmatic answer. A few more questions, but on the way, a lot of very clear answers. How do you like it to be? Social science can do that. Social science, like law, like religion, etc., you can invent a cosmos, but you have to explain also how it looks like. Future City Lab is trying to provide an answer how a city can look like, because cities are being built, and it's not the next Beijing and it's not the next Mumbai, but if urbanization will continue to be a topic, we will need 20 more Shanghais in China, and they will not start as Shanghais. They will start as intermediate secondary cities and grow gradually. I just go to the slides. So we need this initiative. We need people to become future leaders, and I mean it, future leaders. That is actually what policymakers and CEOs of big companies need, leadership. It's largely missing. Asking questions doesn't provide answers for that. We have to anticipate our problems. I think there are a lot of them. We talked about them, but we have to prioritize them also. We may have to make lists and see when and how we engage into them. We need policy-focused research and dialogue, to research, and research itself makes only sense if we can put it into action. It makes no sense to keep it in an ivory tower and for ourselves. We have to engage our economy, we have to engage our society. And Future City Lab Singapore, to finish with a few images. This is actually the minister and a PhD student in the middle, Dirk Hebel, who runs one of the units. We try to visualize so everybody understands what's actually going on in our world. We engage technology, but we also engage people. Robotic production doesn't include the participation of people. Let's not forget, cities grow not anymore because of their economic success, but people come to cities, mostly poor people, simply to be in a city, and that changes everything. That changes the whole success model of cities, and that will put a lot of burden on it. They're not only places for education, security, and progress, but they're also places of despair. Geoffrey West, who was also in this jury, can tell you a lot about it. If you look at big data, and we have to be prepared for it, the wonder world of large cities will bring a lot of hard questions for all of us on the table, and I think architects should be on the forefront to provide at least a few answers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Agudio, that's my name. Okay. So probably me, I'm the only one that is really stranger, because I was probably one of the few who was raising the hand. I'm not an architect. I'm an art historian, and mainly I'm curating contemporary art things. And today I think I'm going to present what the Association of Neurostatic is, because, yes, to make things clearer then, and to present how we do interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary or sometimes just multidisciplinary projects. So what is the association? It is a non-profit organization that is linked to Charité, the medical university and hospital in Berlin, and that was founded in 2008 by Charité leaders, especially neurosurgeons and neuroscientists, and also by curators from different cities, especially from Europe anyway, from Paris, Munich, and London, with the aim to explore and nurture links between the arts and the cognitive sciences from the broadest perspective. So we want to serve as a platform for interdisciplinary exchange, bridging various approaches to art and human experience, cultivating interdisciplinary efforts, and encouraging both a dialogue and, what is important, is a lasting cooperation between the arts and the sciences. In the group, we are many people, especially among the founding members. You can find different professions, different people. We also have some architects, actually, like Tamo Prince, and also, for example, Philippe Ram, you might know him, is a Swiss architect who is within the group in some way. But we also have people like the director of the Department of Neurosurgery here in Berlin, Peter Vaikuzzi, or Alexander Abushi, who was the founder, the initiator of the project. Poppel, there is a renowned neuroscientist from Munich. And now we've been just recently restructuring our institution, and we are now 2 directors. My colleague Daniel Margulis is the scientific director and is a group leader at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, but is also collaborating and is leading in a way the Berlin School of Mind and Brain at Humboldt University. So we have different partners that are both scientific and artistic. As I was saying, the Department of Neurosurgery, the Berlin School of Mind and Brain, the Institute of Neuroaesthetics in London, the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and then the Guggenheim in Berlin and in Venice. And then also architect studio like Philippe Pram or Marcus Missen or Tamo Prince, and the studio Olaf Eliasson that is just here across the street, let's say, because we are collaborating with this class within the Universität der Kunst. It's Institut für Raumexperimente, so an institution that is doing research on spatial experiments, so that it's very linked to architecture. No? Yes, how we do this research. So we still have this name, Association of Neuroaesthetics. Actually, we are trying to do something different from neuroaesthetics. Neuroaesthetics is a word and a field that was founded by Samir Zeki, this neuroscientist working in London in 1999 in his book Art and the Brain. He was he was studying the visual cortex in the human brain and detecting the different areas of the visual cortex, dividing it in VF, V4, V5. I don't need to speak about it. But then he has been trying to reread, let's say, art history through biological parameters and to find the neural underpinning of aesthetic experience. We should say that our approach is a bit different. We want to be more open and to provide a platform of exchange between neuroscientists and artists or people that are from creative people, but without trying to understand, trying to say what is an aesthetic experience. Also because we think that art is something different from just an aesthetic experience, but is more a process. Like somebody this morning was saying, design is research and research is design. At the same time, we think that art is a research process, and neuroscience, as many other fields, is a research process. So we want to bring together these processes of researches. So, of course, we are anyway working with fMRI or MEG or EEG to scan the brain and see which are the reaction to certain images that are presented. But again, I want to underline, we are not then coming to conclusions that are immediately there after having looked at a scan of the brain, because we think that anyway, there is a complexity behind being humans that couldn't be just explained in few images. Also because, as you may know, neuroscience has great technological devices, but it's also true that after a few years of research, something that has been discovered could be completely denied by somebody else. So we are more interested in a more philosophical debate instead of analyzing simply the data. So what we're doing, yes, we're doing education, so maybe this is why we've been invited here, providing educational resources to artists, scientists, and the public about how art and neuroscience can complete each other, can help each other and get in dialogue, stressing importance of art and creativity already in early education. So we have a library in the historical buildings of Charité in Mitte. This is our library that is next to a pathological laboratory, a bit weird, but we have also nice books there. Then we do books ourselves. This, for example, was a publication we did in the occasion of a symposium that we organized at the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice. It is entitled "Seen with Eyes Closed," and it's a research done on the flickering effect of stroboscopic light, 1 minute, so I'm not going to describe it. Then we do public events, as I was saying, also talk series at the School of Mind and Brain, and experiments. These are some of the people that I've been inviting, and I didn't put a hierarchy, who are the neuroscientists, who are the artists, but just to give an overview of some of the faces we have been working with. And then we have interdisciplinary projects. Also, if I want to stress again, they can be also multidisciplinary. It's not easy that a project becomes really interdisciplinary. So, for example, we are working with artists that are like Florian Ecker, who's interested in sound. We're working with people like Cecil Tolas, who's working a lot with smell. And actually, we are trying to do a patient room inside Charité in the hospital, trying to give the best possible condition for a patient, so that also what is smelling and what is hearing and the colors of the walls could give a sense of, not let him feel too uncomfortable being already in an hospital. Then Philip Ram, I'm sure you all know him. You know his experiment with the melatonin room, or this diurism. I can't go into it because I have 1 minute. Or Ivana Franke, that has been doing this machine I was telling you about with the stroboscopic effect. Or Tino Zegal, that participated to our last Congress in Venice. And you can see the people among the scientists. There were Vittorio Gallese, one of the founder of the mirror neural mechanism, Olaf Blanke, the philosopher, cognitive scientist, Alva Noe. And I would like to give maybe some bibliography for a possible convergence of architecture and neuroscience. Some of the most interesting researches actually have been already done at the end of the 19th century, especially in German aesthetics. For example, Wolflin, in his PhD research, has been researching about a psychology of architecture. He wrote this prolegomena to the psychology of architecture, trying to understand how the body is reacting to certain spaces, to certain volumes, to certain architecture, to certain columns. He was also making this difference. Or Adolf Goller, Vischer, the father also of Robert Vischer. So trying to get into Einfühlung, that whose German knows what it is, but we can translate it with the word empathy, but it's a bit complex to be explaining in 30 seconds maybe. And I would like to suggest also this publication by Malgrave, The Architect's Brain, where he's coming back to all these reflections done in German aesthetics, and he's trying also, of course, to find more contemporary discourses into it. And then also I would like to underline there are some institutions that are doing a research in this direction, like the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture in San Diego, whose director, Eberhard, published in 2008 this book, Brain Landscape, The Coexistence of Neuroscience and Architecture. Or in Stanford, somebody told me that they just opened a new academy for neuroarchitecture. And then I wanted to also give two names of people that, in my opinion, are doing interesting things. Charles Spence in Oxford at the Department of Experimental Psychology, who's researching on multisensory perception and also on the sensory perception of food in relation to the context where you are tasting some food. Also, the color of the wall or the difference of the light could change the taste of the food that you are eating. It's something that we should consider. Or, for example, Vittorio Gallese was one of the most philosophical, maybe, as neuroscientist. His perspective is very near to the humanities, and he's also very interested in empathy, because mirror neurons are about that. And is also interested in understanding different architectural contexts and where conditions of empathy are more existing or less. Sorry, I've been too long.
Hello, everybody. And I think I'm almost the last one that you're going to have to listen to. If I can have the sound guy, can I use the microphone instead of standing there? Yeah. Do you mind? Hello, sound guy, are you there? Can we just turn that on? Here we go. Good. So, the title of my talk is Everything Inconvenient. I'm not sure this is on. Everything inconvenient will change. Okay. Now, let's think about the process of the design, procurement, execution of items of architecture. Is it a convenient process? How many of you find that the way we design, procure, and execute is a really convenient, easy, fun process? Anybody? How many find there's lots of points of inconvenience in that process? How many don't really care? Okay, not very good. For me, there's a few things, and I've been really debating what to talk about here, because what I was going to talk about is a study we were doing at Arup. Arup's a global design engineer group. We're about 11,000 people around the world, almost 150 offices. We execute about 11,000 projects every day. And when we're looking at the actual design and procurement, it's interesting to see the tool sets which we use. And so we're very concerned about the changes which are occurring in our profession. And so I've been asked to take a look at what will the tools be that we use in 2020, 2030. Because the architect has a different tool set. Contractors having tool sets. Architects have a different tool set. And Google has decided that our industry is one of the three that they're going to take on. All right? Now, when Google gets a hold of us, people all of a sudden start listening, because they will do something similar to us as banking, as the bank tellers used to think they were important. They were customer service. How could you not go to a bank teller to get money? They were friendly. They knew what to do. Does anybody know a bank teller today is a good friend? Oh, you do. Very good. That's good. How about blacksmiths? Anybody know a blacksmith? There's 3 or 4. The blacksmith was at one point the most important person in the village. They knew how to make the tools, we could make shelter, to make our medical tools, etc. But they lost relevance to society. And the question for me, in all of what we're talking about, is how relevant are we really? And it's we collectively, because I'm an architect and an engineer. How relevant are we to the societies in which we work? Now, when I travel around, I travel about 2 to 3 weeks a month to our offices all over. And if I'm in Botswana and Gaborone, the relevance of the architect is different than if I'm in Shanghai or Sydney, Australia, or wherever, Shenzhen. But if you think about it, we're not looking at a singularity here. And we're talking as if there is a singularity. There's not. There's completely, for me, contextuality. we're looking at the architectural education or the engineering education or the contractor education, we have to be thinking of the context within which we are expecting these individuals to practice, not just to survive, but to thrive. Most of those in our profession survive. They don't really thrive, and we know that. It's a great lie. So we need to be training them to thrive. I also believe that we have an incredible opportunity in front of us. As I think we are going to become blacksmiths in a way, I also believe that architects and the education of the architect puts us in a very unique position to confront and work with some of the most profound challenges which we are facing today in the planet. There's no other education which touches on society, technology, economy, environment, and politics all at the same time, or at least should. Some educational programs don't do that, but they should. There's no other education which doesn't prepare that. And I think what we need to do is to refocus the opportunity in the mindset of our young people that they have a role as leaders. And this was already brought up once. It's no longer the lawyers or the accountants that are needed in leadership positions, but I believe it's architects. Deeply believe that. It's not engineers, too rational. We need the empathy, the understanding of the context of place and time, of placemaking, and of the importance of place in society. So what are we doing to make sure that our 20-year-olds, our 30-year-olds are ready to be leaders? Are we really helping them prepare that? Are we truly helping them to communicate with those with whom they have to interact? Most individuals with whom I interact outside of the Arup don't really like or understand words with 6 syllables. You know, they don't all dress in black and reference things that are 600 years old. They talk, if you will, as normal individuals would talk to each other. They can explain an idea in terms which I like to say my father can understand. And to me, this is another aspect which we with our education have to do, is prepare these young people, men and women, to deal with the real world, where they're talking to politicians, to bankers, to contractors, and getting them ready, not for a debate on an intellectual discourse, but in the practice of the execution of making places for people to thrive. Now, I usually, whenever I'm critical, because this is part of my job in our company is to be critical of what we do, I always like to try to have suggestions of how to go forward. And I thought a lot about this today, because again, I come back to this issue of singularity. And I think of a program which we founded in Cape Town on sustainable cities. Our foundation, the Arup Foundation, looks at founding programs on interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary design. And the only thing I could come up with is a plea for systems thinking and a plea to focus on how our young people integrate and participate in the urban systems of wellness, urban systems of commerce, urban mobility, urban nourishment. I think these, in the context of the place in which we're educating them. It's the only thing I could come up with that would really, to me, have any kind of meaning. And also, I know that so many schools, and I used to be on the faculty in different schools around the world, don't focus on systems. We focus on objects. And objects are important, but they sit within a system. And I have to sit down. Thank you.
Hi, I just asked if I have 5 or 10, and they said 5 or 10. So I don't know what I'm going to do. But, well, as you know, I'm not Marcos Cruz, and well, I don't know if I should say that I'm grateful to be here, but in any case, I am here. Yeah, 2 years ago, IE, as some of you know, was the host institution to the summit, and well, it was fun, but it was also stressing. I was hoping to come here as a tourist, I guess, as Beatriz was 2 years ago. Anyhow, I'm very happy to make some comments. Since, in fact, I was part of an interdisciplinary panel, which was, from my point of view, very interesting. I think it's important that I tell you a little bit about my background. I am the dean of a school of architecture that has been created by a business school. So in that sense, I was the first architect hired by another institution. So when we talk about interdisciplinary action, we tend to think that architects are the center of gravity, and then we call the others to work with us. But in my case, it wasn't like that. In fact, I had to sit down with people that actually I think they were very intelligent to convince them that tables have to be larger than the standard, that we cannot survive with just with Office, you mean PowerPoint, or that not only the software, but the classroom should be different. And I even convinced the president of IE to come with me to visit schools of architecture. And we went to London, we visited AA, and it was wonderful. He really liked it. But when we walked out, I remember we were in Bedford Square, and he said, listen, we're trying to create something that is not only about architects, that if it's possible, that you could come up with something that could tell, that architecture is beyond the architects. I think this would be really what we're aiming for. Because in fact, these people were asking, well, I want you to train or to be able to create a body of faculty and to bring students that are reliable, that they know how to design, but they are able to survive also through crisis times, that at the end, they're also able to lead with other individuals, that they understand that reality is more complex, and for sure, that they're supposed to make money. This is a business school, which at the end is one of the problems that we're facing. But, well, just to give you an idea, when you're in minority, it's different. And then, well, still, 5 years after, we're much more than just one. But still we're in minority. And if I look back, I think that the style of the things that we've done there are the consequence of very well thought scheme of someone who was not an architect, but liked architecture, who's the president of IE. And I think in that sense has made us force our own agenda to understand architecture in a broader sense. So in that summit 2 years ago, I made a presentation which was Architecture Beyond Architects, in the belief that for me, one of the most important problems of interdisciplinarity, it was that architects or architecture schools were somehow caged. That was my feeling, that there are very few members of the faculty that are not architects, that when we collaborate, we mostly collaborate with other architecture schools or with other architects, and well, that we were not reacting to some of the things that architects should react. And I remember listening 2 years ago some very interesting initiatives like the Labs at Columbia or the Super Studio from UCLA. Peter Cook, remember also, talking about this idea of beyond the walls. Graz School of Architecture talking about something similar that Elena described today. And if I have to compare what I saw 2 years ago from what I've seen today, I think the interest on being beyond the traditional barriers or the traditional borders of architecture school is stronger today. Only what I've heard from Joachim de Klerk or Winka Dabeldam, Niklaus Hirsch, what I had the opportunity to share with Anton Falkaitz, and of course, this idea that Mark Wigley brought of the platform, instead of being something rise, that we put it down, I imagine that situation a better way to bring people in. And well, I think the only problem is we might be able to corner them because they cannot escape in that hold from us. So at the end, it might be a little bit the same game, but I don't know. Anyhow, I mean, the role of a respondent is to respond what I've heard, but I still I want to just give three questions that are related with what I heard today, not only in this panel. I think that if you want to be interdisciplinary, we really have to think, where should architecture schools operate? Because my feeling is that when you become interdisciplinary, you start to move from your center of gravity, and you start to either bring or to export part of your knowledge somewhere. And the trend is that we are all getting outwards. So in that situation, my question is, what is supposed to be what is left inside in this new situation? What is the curriculum? What is this new curriculum? What is really just the pure understanding of architecture in this? Is there such understanding of just pure architecture under these new terms? I also would like to think that not only the word, but who should be operating architecture schools when architecture doesn't belong to us any longer, or at least we are not the only owners of that. Should we bring some other people really to the management position of architecture? Should we be as generous as that? Well, I throw that question to the audience. And again, or lastly, how should we understand architecture schools in this concept, in this new environment of mix with other institutions, other people, other professionals? I think that my guts tell me that we should really listen to the world outside. I don't have a presentation, but I always try to explain my thoughts through very simple images. And if I had to summarize my idea of what the meaning of interdisciplinarity could be based on what I've heard today and what I heard 2 years ago, is that I think that architects have been more or less as sea stars during the last decades, people who have been trained in a way that you can operate with in different directions, and many of them. But at the end, that we are still really stick to our ground. Even if we can bring, all these people, we are very slow in moving. So if I could call for an image for the architect of the future that I can really engage this new agenda of being more mixed, I would recall the image of the octopus, which is like, the metamorphosis of the sea star into an octopus. An animal that is able to move, that at some point it has the capacity to move those all 8 tentacles, and at some point that if it's necessary, it can ink, the enemy from you and disappear. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, panelists, for your presentation, and Javier, especially for that last image of the starfish and the octopus. I think that their presentations reflected enormous diversity of approaches. When I first looked at this whole area of interdisciplinary education, I thought it was going to be rather simple, sort of, well, what can architecture gain from other disciplines, and maybe what can we share with others? And thinking about it and listening to them, listening this morning, it became obvious that it certainly is not so simple, just of one of cross-pollination or in 2 directions, but there are a whole lot of other issues. And I think we heard today from Hubert, for him, interdisciplinary is getting a piece of the pie, maybe even defining the pie, but certainly getting a piece of that. Elena spoke to us about cooperation. She spoke about applying knowledge from one field and scientists from one field looking closely at architecture and applying knowledge, and also talked about innovative projects where maybe the application of knowledge wasn't direct, but her projects in and of themselves are research and our experiments. So interdisciplinary work as experimentation. We heard about shared tools, We heard about skills, not only tools and maybe software, hardware, but also skills that can go from one to another. We didn't hear too much about biomimicry, but that would have been Marcos Cruz's area, and I'm sure some of you in the audience can contribute to that. And then we also heard words like leadership, and another one I thought was especially insightful is context and interdisciplinary pollination, that the whole subject of other disciplines in architecture and architecture and other disciplines is, as architecture itself, linked to a context. So I think let's jump into a few questions, maybe 2 or 3 for the panel, and then I think the best thing is to open it up to the audience, because instead of having two-way communication, maybe we can have 50 or 100-way communication. So panelists, you spoke about all of these things, leadership. Again, you lamented the situation of architects. You talked about communication. And Javier, you have experience in a business school that puts a lot of emphasis on skills like leadership and communication. Is that the major area, or is that a major area for architecture, for studies to become part of the syllabus in architecture in the future? Should we be training people to know how to survive or thrive through their skills? Microphone, and please close.
You know
Okay.
my answer.
Okay, well, Chris.
Okay. Well, I think yes, of course. My concern is that I think it is an obvious comment that when you walk out from architecture school, you are facing many things that you have not been educated on, and one of them is how to lead, how to start, how to convince, how to. And well, you know that since the very beginning, we were asked to bring these things into our curriculum. And how, I mean, the beauty of that is how you make the translation of the way this has been taught in other disciplines into architecture and to design-related subjects. And in any case, I think there are many ways to train on leadership. I myself am a Columbia grad, and when I was there, I saw extremely powerful student instructors and faculty members that were teaching us how to be a leader without really having let's say, a structured agenda. But for sure, I think there is a lack, a little bit of a percentage of our effort as educators in bringing these skills to students of schools of architecture.
Yeah, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, this is a difficult one to answer in a straight way. Again, I come back to my team hate it when I always say the answer to so many of their questions to me is, well, it depends. It depends. It depends on the context in which you are working. And I think what we have to be looking at is the context of the culture in which we are educating. So again, I come back to, if we're in Cape Town, we have different needs in a program than if we're perhaps at Columbia. And I mean it in a good way. But I still believe across the board that we have to be helping to train leaders, and I come back to that, leaders who understand how to communicate and how to listen, and understand a budget, who know how to stay within a budget, and I see so the other thing I see is with our 20-year-olds, we have incredibly passionate young people who join our company, and I think this is similar in architecture, where we almost have a problem with the elder generation who won't let the younger generations get on and actually execute what they're passionate about. And I think it's also a systemic challenge, because the accreditation boards don't get out of the way because they create a system which propagates so very narrow-minded view. And the last thing I'll say is I think that the other challenge is the abdication of responsibility that has occurred through the architect, where contractually, so often you're saying, well, I'm really not responsible for anything. It's the contractor, it's the engineer who's taking all the liability and the responsibility. And so I think that there's a trickle down. I come from the practice side. There's a trickle down that we see. So we're having an increasing number of clients saying to us, can you hire a good architect, please? Right? Because we know you're going to be able to execute it, so can you get one of those men or women? And I don't think that's where we in this room want to see the future of the profession as servants of other masters. So this is where we've got to come back into that leadership positioning.
Hubert, what about you? Because as a dean of a school of architecture, one thing I hear today that we're talking a lot about ideas, we're lamenting things, we're hoping for things, and part of it may have to do with that eternal optimism of the architect that we see that brighter future. But you have to put it into reality. So how do you do it on day to day? Not sort of pie in the sky, but how do you get that piece of the pie?
I would say the unborn optimism that probably has to come with the profession. I don't think that's something that people learn. Maybe you can already make a test with a 5-year-old if he could become an architect. But I think that unborn optimism shouldn't lead to become too naive about the facts. And I think if we talk about working interdisciplinary, that should also not mean that suddenly we only deal with the knowledge of others. I think there has to be a core knowledge and expertise also in that person. And if I would like to frame such a person, I think we should ask ourselves, what are the boundaries of such a knowledge base? And at least we should provide a wayfinding opportunity that might change, not only in geographical terms, but also in terms of how the profession itself on a particular location on the globe has changed very rapidly, I would say. So on the one hand side, we have to keep a certain flexibility on one hand, but on the other hand, there's a sort of a rigid, non-generalist but expert knowledge necessary to convey that you can really do the job. I think if we sort of pull out of the team, suddenly thinking, yes, we can bring other experts together, but we have no expertise or very little expertise to add, that would be very dangerous. And in that sense, I think we should also ask ourselves, what's the scope of such an operation? What is missing to do that? Is it just an endless addition of another skill, or are there some skills really missing to figure out in a more overarching idea what architects in an interdisciplinary team, what their role is, and also what the resources are necessary to teach, produce, and convey this knowledge. I think this is not an infinite list, but it's a finite one. We should be open enough to be able to change it, but we have to ask that question. It's not just another thing and just another interesting, beautiful, I don't know what, but it goes down to some very hardcore questions. And I think it's not, that's not completed yet. And the curriculum has to provide it.
Yeah. Elena, would you like to pick up on that? And
no,
also,
I agree that actually that interdisciplinary could just not add something, but could also be just a dangerous things, because you need expertise when you want to dialogue, that's true, and sometimes there is not an understanding of each other, because when you're speaking very different languages, it's very hard to understand each other. But sometimes I think when you pose some precise questions, then the collaboration and the dialogue with other people could be very important, of course. And you were saying before that we don't need more questions, but we also have to come out with some answers. And I do agree, but for example, in interdisciplinarity, probably when you want to find the answer to the question, being in a cooperative group of people from different fields, then in this case I would say it's good to pay more attention on the questions than on the answers, because when you're speaking two different languages, it's better to be in a position that is more the one of having doubts instead of, especially with neuroscience, as I was saying before. I mean, neuroscientists, they have a lot of technological instruments, also a lot of money to do research, and it happens that they come out with some new understanding of the human beings, but I mean, personally, I think, it takes a long time to really get to some answer in this case. But I agree that in generally, it's also good to come out with some answers.
I'm also wondering, because at the end of the day, this summit is about education, right? I have asked myself many times, as long as you're in the university, often the discourse is that you can really engage in tasks and in challenges that might become rare once you're in practice, right? Also something that sounds a little bit depressing, something that doesn't have to be that way. But I would say as long as you're in the university, you're in a low risk, high return environment, like, right? There's not really risk with your doings involved. Whatever you do, whatever comes out, that's great. If you're out of university, it's the opposite. No. You're in a high risk, low return environment. Suddenly the whole environment changes. And although the university certainly is not the practice, a lot of people in a very utilitarian way, also colleagues of mine, like to make believe that the practice is actually the best place for the education. I think there are some significant differences here, but it would be good to bring those realities closer together. If you take somebody who studies medicine and you say it just doesn't matter if you train your capacity, because medicine, like playing an instrument, very interesting, like architecture, it's handcraft and knowledge and capacity. If you say it doesn't matter if you can make a good cut, maybe in a piece of dead meat, as long as you train, but you have to have that security and that knowledge. It does matter, and I think we should sort of take maybe architecture more serious, and I think that's maybe one of the problems, that a lot of the people study it also because it's something interesting and maybe even cool and sexy, but they don't even aspire to practice it. I think there's a sort of a
Thanks, Hubert. I think it was really interesting because this morning in the first panel, we did see, and we heard from panelists how exciting it was for their students when they were in the field. So that, I think, was one clear example of that. Chris, you wanted to say something in response to this?
Well, I think it was interesting just to pick up on that thing. I think what's really interesting and encouraging to me is the notion that we're expanding what we understand of as the practice of architecture. What's acceptable, what we encourage our students to understand in their mental map of what they can do afterwards. And I think as long as we're helping them to realize that being, not being a starchitect is okay, you're not a failure, that maybe if you go into community practice, it's like the whole range of opportunities which this training gives you, I think that's really fantastic. And so I think this is with the education, encouraging that breadth is crucial. Because one of the other things I think we need desperately, globally, that architects can do is our visualizations, representations of a positive tomorrow. Because the news and all media is full of, and all the films are full of hell on earth coming, right? But if you kind of look for what communities really have bought into an idea that 2030, 2040, 2050 is going to be a great place to be. We can't wait to get there, right? And what are our communities going to look like that inspires citizens to really, I would say, look at the future with hope and aspiration?
I think this is really interesting because people talk a lot about what are the special skills of architects, and it is that ability to see or to imagine a future in 3 dimensions that other professions don't have. But I just want to ask one question to Javier, and then I want to open it up to the floor for questions. Or if you want to make a comment on what has been said, brief comments. But Javier, I remember that once you talked about not only that architecture could gain skills or gain knowledge, information, et cetera, from other professions, and we see that in teams. I'm sure at Arup you have that under the umbrella of this huge company, which is multidisciplinary. It's full service. It provides a lot of, reduces the risk for your clients, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I know you spoke about what can architecture do for others. Don't ask what others can do for architecture, but what can architecture do for others? Do you see architecture as having a role in other disciplines, and how do you feel about all of this use of the word design thinking in business schools and using the word architecture in architecture being appropriated by technology, the architecture of computers and systems, et cetera, and the bastardizing of the word architecture? So what can architecture do for others?
What I know is that if we really want to make an impact outside, we should really try to educate also people that are making decisions or are setting trends. And in that sense, as you know, some of the experiences we had teaching the students from our MBAs, it's been amazing. These people really care about architecture, but they will probably be the ones that are taking the real decisions, because they will be deciding which buildings are going to be built, how many of them, the budget, and who will be doing that. So I think it's important that we spread this message outside. So if I think one of the challenges is that we really walk out and then we try to educate, or either we bring students that are not really architects to our architecture schools, or that we walk out from our institutions and our schools to go where the people that are really involved in the design process and the communities and the politics, that we can really tell them about the importance of design. I was really, really happy when I heard all that Joachim de Klerk. I don't even know him. I don't even know if he's here still. When he really was claiming to, hey, listen, design can make an impact, but we are not maybe the ones that should make the impact. There are the other ones, or we should interact with them. Or, to the point that you were even trying to say that let's not design, let's make that. Let's not build, okay? But at least I interpreted your message in that way, and through the experiences I've gone through in having people that are not architects and that we've been teaching them, it's been great. So I do believe we have that role. I don't know if you know, but there's this being in a business school, you end up with these things in your head. I don't know if it's good or bad, but. The business of education, architectural education, compared to the 100% of business of education, it is not even 1% to the total. So, and the ones that are really taking 20% or even 30% is social sciences, business. Really, we are really tiny. Really tiny, and we should really enlarge to expand our area. Otherwise, I think we're going to keep being like this, which might be fine, but I think we all perceive that we are somehow getting somehow isolated, or at least that we could really do more than what we're doing.
Hubert, you want 30 seconds?
Maybe picking up on Javier, because I'm somehow jealous that you having the Department of Economy actually at hand, because we trying to find an urban economist and convince our school's president to pay for such a professorship, because I think that's certainly one of the legs that are missing in a lot of the visions, because let me pose it that way. I would say if you listen to the news, you just painted this sort of catastrophic picture of the future. But what the future really holds for us is that demographic growth will continue and economic growth will slow down eventually. You know, this is a scenario that is very unpopular to discuss. I'm talking on a global level. So how does actually a world, cities with increasing demographic growth and stagnant economic growth, how can that work? And I think this is exactly where visualization, vision, architectural genius can come in. But even today, we actually sort of missing out on a very big number of people that we could provide solutions for, because, you know, I'm not talking about social housing, because social housing is typically paid by taxes. Low-cost housing is just economic, not cheap. Low-cost housing is a field where there's simply no answers in the field. You know, the people who need houses, they can build them themselves, but there's no product sought out by architects that can jump into that gap. And I think economics, or a school of economics and architecture, you might be in a very good situation to provide some answers to that.
I just want to really quick pick up on it, because I think it's really important for us in this room to realize that there's this is almost a unique historical time for us to be able to turn back out and reach out to various different communities where these other communities who have shunned us for the past, say, decade are really looking to us to help. For example, Arup's a partner of the World Economic Forum, and I founded a Global Agenda Council for Design at WEF 5 years ago. And that community is deeply interested in design and design thinking to help with their recognition of global problems. Second-tier cities, not the New Yorks, the Tokyos, but second-tier cities are desperate for ideas on how not just to survive, but how to thrive. And again, we in this room, and all the cadres of colleagues who are not here in architectural education, are perfectly placed through student projects to work with these smaller cities to help them create visions which their citizens will understand. Again, not 6-syllable words, but 2-syllable words, 2-syllable images, and get them behind this idea. Yeah. And I think
Chris, I'm going to stop you there, because this is sounding a little bit like this is wonderful, but it's a little bit evangelical. And what we talked about at the beginning of this panel is not this sort of pie in the sky. You're with Arup, which is a huge, huge company. So to help these second-tier cities is probably something enormously in range and doable for a company like you.
But I think we're not. That's what I'm saying. The second-tier cities are not our clients, because they don't have the cash. They're cutting everything. And again, this is where the academy, this is where institutions and studios have the opportunity to reach out to this is the vast majority of the world's population live there. This is
okay.
Anyway, I'll shut up.
Okay. Now let me just ask. I have one question for Elena, and then I promise, then the audience. How did the connection initiate between neurosciences and art? Was that the vision of one person? And when it started, was it smooth, or were there conflicts?
So it was mostly because of the vision of one person that is a neurosurgeon. That very unluckily is not a very nice story to be said, but now he's in a coma. So for a while we have been also waiting for him, and now this is why I was saying we have been restructuring our institution. But it was because of him, because yes, being a doctor and also a researcher, because of course when you are a neurosurgeon anyway, you are also doing a lot of neuroscientific research. But also being himself in contact with the artistic world very much, especially contemporary artists, but also architects. Then he wanted to challenge the possible dialogue between the two disciplines. And so then he managed to put together a group of people that were anyway sharing this interest in the cognitive sciences. Of course, in a broad sense, because some people were more interested in psychology or psychoanalysis, or some other people more really in collecting data, so in finding volunteers. So yes, it was actually an adventure of one person, and now we are a group of people that are sharing different perspective probably, but we try, yes, to have a program that is common, of course.
Great, thanks. Okay, now to the audience, yes. Could somebody, and then Chaya, you're number 2? No, we need the microphone because the person in the last seat over here needs to hear you. So the microphone really close, please.
Hi, does that work? Yeah. We've heard quite a lot about the what, some more about the why of education, much less about the how. And we can actually communicate so much about our values, what we value in education, through the how, through the approach that we take, who we include, who we exclude, etc. In work that I've done in the past, research I've done in the past has suggested that students are very much, as you would expect, coloured by the attitudes of their tutors towards other professions, towards other disciplines. That research also showed that the mere act of putting different disciplines together can actually reinforce stereotypes. It doesn't necessarily lead to mutual understanding, empathy, etc., or into multi-transdisciplinary working, etc. So I guess my question is around how to avoid all of this, and to direct us back to how. As educators, as pedagogues, etc., what would the panel say? What do they propose as the pedagogical strategies for interdisciplinary learning, which I thought was the focus of this panel, and I haven't heard much about.
Okay. Okay. Anybody from the panel want to take it, or anybody from the audience who's doing that? Excuse me? Someone in the back, do you want to respond to that question?
I want to respond to that.
Okay, all right.
It seems a kind of
I'm going to stay in my seat.
Could you stand up, please,
Okay.
and tell us your name?
My name is Liz Werner. I'm teaching at the Dessau Institute of Architecture, and I just came back from a year at Carnegie Mellon, where we also discussed curriculum and how to deal with the kids who are growing up with computers and how to get it into this knob accreditation issue, which we also have in Europe similarly. So this is the introduction, but I do want to respond to exactly the why, the how we do this. And also I would like to address Elaine in terms of the neuroaesthetics, which is more the cognitive sciences, I would say now. There is a book, Cognitive Architecture, 2010, I think, Deborah Hauptman and Warren Neidig, that deals on one hand with hi, Deborah. That deals with what Philip Ram does, but it also starts dealing with the issue of how are our brains structured and how do we learn. And I'm particularly interested in this interdisciplinary issue in terms of how do we actually educate our students whose learning tools and instruments are structured differently to the ones who've started working with repeater graphs, because they have a different tactility. We don't say windows, we say openings, which is a huge difference, especially in sort of architectural design that uses scripting, that works with generative modeling and not descriptive modeling. And this is, in fact, what you said with the complexity and the systems. And I think what we do need, not just teaching our students, but also teaching our educators, is cybernetics and system theory and biology that started with Helmholtz and later on Bertalanffy and so on. And this is something which I think architecture education is totally missing. And this is, I think, where you can learn interdisciplinarity much better than just directly addressing the Max Planck Institute in terms of the colloid and interface research, for instance.
Great, great, thank you. Chris, did you want to respond to that briefly?
I did, and the thought went out,
Okay.
went in and out the other eye. But
Okay.
I'll think of it again. Yep.
About
Sorry
it.
about that.
Okay.
You made me think of something about tools. Oh, I know what it was. So what's very interesting when we look at our younger generations, because one of the early, we've just been doing this study on Building Design 2020 for just about 2 months. And we're seeing already a deep dichotomy in tools and belief in tools between those who know how to script, to program, and those who don't. And those who know how to script, I believe, are the future, and those who don't are the blacksmiths and the dinosaurs. And there's a fundamental generational divide between those who believe in scripting and those who don't. And to me, that's really fascinating, because those who don't believe in it are in the managerial positions, and those who do believe in it are those who are trying to do interesting and cool things. And so we see this in our things as well. I want to answer that question very quickly. Is that when we put people into teams from the day they join, and so they're always in a building design team. We've got mechanical, structural. They're all together, and this goes around the world. There are a couple offices where they only have one discipline, but typically they're always together. And I tried a long time ago when I was still teaching to work between get engineering students and architectural students together, and I found if you did it too early, it always was doomed to fail. They need to have some kind of knowledge that they can contribute to the team so that they had a common vocabulary. And I thought that language became also quite interesting. Because you just said window versus opening, or a node versus a joint. So that language, so we don't have a common language. I doubt if we ever will. And this is always in all project teams and interdisciplinary teams. A real challenge is the language that we use, so you can violently disagree on something, but you're actually talking about exactly the same thing.
Great, thanks. Chaya, you wanted to speak? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I was getting a little worried with this panel. Because the panel before talked about naivete, and it talked about going beyond the boundaries or having no walls or whatever. And this panel seems to propagate not interdisciplinarity, but really say, well, we are architects and we'll do the job for you. And you better listen to us because we have special knowledge, and education should make sure that that special knowledge is there. Now, I wonder whether the panelists would think a little differently. I'm putting a sort of hypothetical question, or as they say in the law courts, putting it to you. There can be concentrated knowledge in few people who have devoted their whole lives to it, but there's also knowledge distributed throughout society. And while one respects the need for that concentrated knowledge, maybe the time has come for that distributed knowledge, which is of many, many ages. It's from 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and maybe 20 years from now. All that knowledge is there, and it's in many languages, and it's that which is really the resource which we ought to connect to. And for that, maybe our profile as experts will have to be a little smaller. Just a suggestion.
I think, Chaya, just one sec. I appreciate that comment. I guess on a personal level, the only thing that I feel is that we have to be very careful about what we define as knowledge, because there can be a lot of information that can be enormously valuable to inform a process, but to think that that's knowledge that can be directly applied successfully to a situation, I would have my doubts. Hubert, please.
Well, I appreciate your comment, because I do think that nowadays, much more than 20, 30 years ago, I would say there's not really a difference between vernacular knowledge and academic knowledge. In that sense, I would call it more explorative research, a lot of what already exists is sort of absorbed, and experts are also the people who are in the field and face a particular problem, not only the expert that is called in and looks at something. But maybe to say one word to the earlier question, right, about the how the education is actually taking place. I would say the curriculum of an architect that from the very beginning, coming out maybe of secondary school and entering architecture school, it's pretty obvious that in a very brief period of time you have to get a lot of basic knowledge into that curriculum, and that's quite difficult. I would say for about the first 2 years or so, it's really basics, just that you 3, you say, more or less, yes. But I would say one probably has to choreograph very carefully, not to overload that and take also pieces out of the curriculum and replace it with others. It cannot be at the snowplow effect that we throw more and more ideas and contents into this curriculum, but we also have to carefully decide what might not be relevant anymore. And that, I would say, I've seen as the most difficult task in an organization that also has its internal flaws. You know, it's not very easy to throw something out. It's much easier to bring it in. Yeah. But it will be necessary. And I think in that sense, one should probably adopt a bit more flexibility in all the processes along with the education.
Thank you. There was
a
question.
Can I?
Yeah, we'll let Elena, and then Hans-Jürgen, you said there was a question.
No, I just wanted to comment that I also think that an enrichment of diversity, as you were saying, is very important. So just agreeing.
Yeah, great.
I just wanted to make an additional comment too. I completely agree with what you just said. And I'm a bit disappointed because I don't think we had propagated that. Okay, you were provocative, but okay, I do buy what you say, but I'm gonna provoke you. Do you know that in Europe, for example, there's I think 60% of the countries, the education of the architect is 80% defined. I mean, I am in an institution that truly they don't really care about that and force me to really push the boundaries, and they always say that it take me to jail, they will take me out of there. But really, the situation, what you said, the accreditation really is not in this direction. So that is a problem. But then you graduate and then you try to get a job. And for example, I'm now operating as an architect in London. And the way you have access to do any kind of building is because you've been able to demonstrate that you've done that exact type of buildings during the last 10 years. And this is not in the UK, because as you know, I am also doing things in India. And it's exactly the same type of culture. So this fantastic idea of the multi-exchange and all these messages, in which I do believe, it's only at this level. And I don't see how are we going to be able to change this at a higher level, because at the end, there's other people making these decisions. That's why I'm obsessed to really reach the people that really make the decisions. Yeah. Because at the end, we are in a...
Okay. 2, 3. Okay, and I think let's try to keep centered on the subject. And I appreciate your comments, Javier. But I think if we try to get into Bologna and accreditation and all that, we're going to dilute the discussion.
That was not the intention.
Thank you. Please.
Okay, thank you. My name is James. I teach in England. I'm glad someone mentioned it, because it seems you may remember England. We're not that important anymore. But in architectural education, we've always taught for practice 10 years hence. In 2 weeks' time, I'll meet our new students, and all I can be certain is they'll be working, in a future I can't even conceive. And I wanted to distinguish knowledge and information as a talk about how much information there is. And I think our young students are very capable of disseminating it, of filtering information and telling it, because they always have their smartphone in their hands. They're reading and filtering at a speed inconceivable 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm paraphrasing someone who spoke at another conference in the UK, which is where all the British architectural educators are. That's why they're not here. They don't go abroad very much. Our curricula are full. Certainly in the UK, we can't fit anything else in. The RIBA, I'm sorry, I'm mentioning accreditation, but the RIBA have validation criteria which specify everything, and we can't fit anything. We can barely teach it in 5 years. So my aspiration, and this is maybe answering to that question of how we do this, is to really aim to educate maybe leaders, but I would just say architects, who are able to understand and filter out these different kinds, these sources of information and knowledge themselves. So that we obviously, I give them some information, but then obviously they make that transition to becoming critical learners where they find it themselves. And they identify, they listen, they read, and they think for themselves. How do I do that with first-year architects who have a very mediocre average grade point entry at our university? Well, I don't like the RIBA validation criteria, but I want to give it to them and be explicit. I think a way we can work towards this right now is to be explicit about how our hands are tied by these accreditation procedures and criteria. Maybe it doesn't work in your jurisdiction, but that's how I would propose to do it, and let them pick apart this sort of this language that is defining how we teach architecture. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, because it seems like what you're proposing is something enormously pragmatic. So thank you. Luis, and then Luis was waiting, and then we'll get to you. You'll be the next, okay? Okay, and then Tristan after Eric, and then Dietmar. Okay, take it away, Luis, 2 minutes.
I would like just to push Hubert a little bit more in the direction he was going. You know, every time we engage in conversations like this, we very quickly, this becomes an additive conversation. We need to add things to the curriculum. We need more leadership, business, many different things. So the question is, we don't have more time in our curriculums. You know, in probably most of your institutions, architecture is probably the longest career except for medicine. At least in my institution, when they report 4-year graduation, there's always an asterisk that says, except for architecture, that is 5 or 6 years. So what gives? You know, what is in the chopping board right now? And I would like to ask you to be radical in the way you answer the questions. You know, if you had asked people trained in the 70s or in the day that we were not going to be teaching geometry in an architectural curriculum, people would have said that you were crazy. You know, in the 90s, you have said, you know, we're not going to teach software anymore. They will, you know, think that you were crazy. And right now, I think the only people that goes to university to learn software are the professors. You know, really, the students already know, and the little classes that we teach of software, you know, I don't really know why we're there. So what is next? What is in the chopping board?
Excellent example.
30 seconds.
Yeah, very quick.
Okay.
I was actually at Columbia University when sort of computers have been introduced officially, formally in the education. But what is happening now is actually Ludger Hoverstad, which is in charge of exactly that segment of education on the computer, IT. He just resigned from teaching that because what we have now is a big garage project, and whoever wants to find out something goes there and learns it on the side. You know, that doesn't have to be formally taught anymore. It's much too quick. Things are changing too fast. So if who doesn't already know scripting is sort of, so to speak, either in the garage or just forget about it. It doesn't have to be in the curriculum. So I think there is space for debate and flexibility.
Great, thank you.
30 seconds.
Eric?
30 seconds.
Eric, is Eric on Moss?
Javier, go ahead.
No, I had the opportunity to interview many people before we created our curriculum, many of them being professionals. And the conclusion was that I think a good 35% of the curriculum that they were taught, it was not useful for them at that stage. It doesn't mean that you can drop 35% of the curriculum, but I underline. Oh, sorry, I have to go to the bathroom.
Eric.
No, I was just
close
thinking,
to your mouth.
Thinking about what multiple disciplinary means. What multidiscipline actually implies. And I think the first thing it implies is the inadequacy, conceptual inadequacy of professional education. So as it narrows, as the scope narrows, in order to deal with conceptual issues that are outside the narrowing of the scope, you need to bring in assistance. So there's multiple disciplines that apply strictly to pragmatic professional contexts, meaning I can't do the acoustics, bring me one of your guys. There's a more interesting one which has to do with multiple disciplines in an intellectual way, which means are you learning, are you understanding, what sort of character are you educated? And it occurred to me, and we did a project a few years ago in a place called Bahia Balandra, which is on the east coast of Baja, California. And we were making a city. There was a discussion of a city, and we had various consultants for all the usual reasons. The ecological guys, the Arup LA guys run, and so on. And then we had the Stanford Humanities Lab, who were really local and were essentially medievalists. And what's interesting about this as a concept model is that in a pragmatic sense, if you want to extend the discipline, you bring in people to complement and to supplement what you know a bit or don't know and are obligated either by the context or by the client to come to know. But we brought in a group of characters from a completely different frame of reference, which is an interesting way to think about using consultants. So there isn't anything in the conceptual logic, typically, of making that city, which would validate the presence of a medievalist. And therefore, the most interesting discussions and questions, and this is probably typical of Stanford anyway, it's just a cast of lost characters, but maybe the other characters were really the lost characters, who were all over the place, had very little knowledge about architecture and space and so on and so on. And there's an argument for going in the opposite direction, which is really the point. To supplement where you're going, you go where you didn't anticipate going, and you wind up conceptually with a solution you never anticipated. And we did that. Therefore, we got fired. but the discussion was, and so this is at least a part of who you add. I think that's really the point. Who you add and why.
Yeah.
And what are you trying to learn?
Great, thank you. We have Tristan, and then we have Natasha, okay? Stand, please, and Dietmar, we'll get to you.
Tristan Sturck. And this is really...
Really close, please hold the microphone.
Tristan Sturck, and this is really for Chris. You know, you spoke about the blacksmith and the architect, and you spoke about the need, maybe, or you sort of saw one of the answers as being scripting. So if sort of the future of architecture, perhaps, is scripting. I was just curious if you can talk a little bit about why you think that might save, or why that will help architects or architecture not be the blacksmith.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure that I would say that if you know how to script, you'll not be a blacksmith. I think that those who don't know how or don't understand the opportunity that being able to script offers will become the blacksmiths. Okay, and this comes out of also looking at our own engineers. There's a whole group who don't really know how to manipulate the tools. They use the tool as a given rather than the tool as a creative. They use a tool for production rather than for creativity.
Can I follow up? I really asked the question. I completely believe in scripting, and I'm right there. But I was reading this month's Harvard Business Review, and they were talking about sort of the death of the consultant.
Yeah.
And how consultants generally are the next thing to be revolutionized. We are a consultant.
Yes.
And I think scripting is certainly a powerful tool, but I'm just wondering about the business case and how we start thinking about what this really entails for who we are as a profession.
Yeah. So Martha's going to say this is way out of the theme of this this panel, and she's probably right. And I think that's a really, really, really important question, as our profession and our tool sets are cloudified, so that anybody can actually go on Google or whatever tool you use, Chrome, and download a little analytical package that can take a look at a plot of land and will tell you the envelope that you can have now, and will give you the price of a standard, say, 3-bedroom house. I mean, that actually exists already right now. It's in a black box that you can't get to, but it's there. So, and it's all publicly available information that can be accessed. And so then the question really is, then what's the role of the consultant? And this is something which I'm with my team confronting right now as well. And I'm not sure if it has to do with multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, but it does have to do with the next decade, as we are at that tipping point in the Northern Hemisphere developed world. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't think this will be the same case in some other parts of the world, but I think for us in our core business area, for us right now, it's a huge issue for us. And we can talk about that after some wine,
Yeah,
I think
that's,
or beer.
Chris, I really appreciate that comment and the question, Tristan, because you're somehow bringing us back to the essence. It's who are we as architects? What do we teach and what do we learn? What is important and what isn't? What should be included and what can be left out? We have one more question from the floor, and then two more questions from the floor.
I would also like to contribute to the discussion.
Oh, it's a question. I thought you were just going to close us up, Dietmar. Okay. Natasha, I'm so sorry. Natasha, a question, then Dietmar, a question, and then... Okay, quick.
Down to 60 seconds.
Okay.
Done. I'm going to start with a point where
really
you
close. Speaking.
I'm going to start with the point where you stopped off. The question is, do we enter a Formula One race with an Opel from the 60s? I was waiting for somebody, like you talked about curriculums, you talked about education, but I'm sorry, unless we actually really get into the point of certificates and of this rigid system, why are we talking about how to become interdisciplinary? Then comes the other part. Are we architects disciplinary? I certainly believe yes. I go with the comment of Mark Wigley earlier. We have little bits of everything. What we're missing is also what you talked about earlier, the language. Why is it missing? That takes us back to the bachelor's. Oh, here flies my pen. Because it comes through practice. And when a student enters with 18 and we give them 4 years where they have no choice of talking to an anthropologist, they are just with drawings. We only know the language of drawings when we're done as architects. And that's why we cannot communicate with other disciplines. And that takes a process of unmaking. It took me 2 years to unmake. And this then takes me to the last point, which is, again, with Mark, he talked about horizontality, but education, co-learning also came in another topic. I'm sorry to Mark, that only exists in Anglo-Saxon educations. My experience as a Palestinian in Germany, France, and Spain proves otherwise. Here it's still very much hierarchical. This doesn't exist, the horizontality. And also it lies in contrast, this concept lies to me in contrast with a word that has been repeating so many times today, which is we train, we teach, we learn, we teach. Am I the only student here? If this is a summit about education, I have to ask, where are the students today? Don't we have? Like, this is a question to everybody here.
Okay, thank you. Dietmar, you want to take it now after that?
we invited everybody, so
thank you. Here's your
I don't know why the students are not here, but we invited them. But I would also like to come back to this term interdisciplinarity. And from my experience with my research projects, I don't know if it's on, but okay. So from my experience with research projects I was involved in, the best results always came out when we had very strong different disciplines with their own opinions. And in my opinion, the common sense came in many times too early. So I'm all in favor for very different disciplines and for very strong positions of the different disciplines, and you clash them together, and then you get you get the best results. And for this, the architect and the architect's education, in my opinion, should be that the architect understands what the drivers are, and actually Chris can tell a lot about the drivers of change, but what are the drivers which come to which results or which lead to which results? And if the architect understands this from the different experts, he can judge. But this is my opinion about it. But the other thing is the language the language between the different disciplines. So working at the ETH Zurich, working with metabolists, natural scientists, architects, sociologists, interdisciplinarity was a catastrophe. So nobody understood the other one. The one was talking about figures, the other one was talking about metaphors. And so in the end, there was a chaos, and we needed a moderator, a mediator, to come up with some statement. So it took us a year to understand that geometry could be a language for everybody. So, and then we are in a descriptive, but maybe botanical way, where you describe, but you also count figures and form. So I believe interdisciplinarity is a very strong part of the education. But don't forget that the architect should take architecture seriously. He has to understand, but in the end he has to judge. But he needs very, very strong experts, not too weak, conflict, then common sense.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dietmar, for that. Advocating disrupting the education. Do we have one? We have one more question, and I keep looking at my watch because I think you want us to finish 2 more questions. Okay, 1, 2, and then we're going to party. Okay, so is it right? Okay. Okay. Please stand up. You can't hear. It's not on. Yeah.
What color is it? Tell us. Flash.
Yeah.
Okay. Anton, I'm giving my presentation tomorrow, but just let me share some experience we had with when creating our new curriculum at the University of Applied Arts when we implemented our new master program. So there was a big discussion if we should be trans, inter, or multidisciplinary or whatever. And I think the problem was always the wording of discipline. So we just figured out that we actually replaced it by fields of expertise in terms of, and finally we get a chance to create a faculty. In terms of faculty, in its meaning of facultas, which is talking about opportunity. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you had to comment?
Yeah, just, it just seemed to me that in terms of architectural education, I think nobody's really raised the point that architectural education as a discipline itself is actually quite new. I mean, in the sense that we had guilds, we had internships, and really the sort of educational structuring is really not more than 150 years old. I mean, the AA started 160 years ago as an association to formalize new technologies, new developments and such. So I think what hasn't been spoken about much is how much that has also changed in the last 50 years. So, you know, when I studied in the 70s, there was no such thing as a Bachelor of Architecture by design. There was history, there was planning. So the very idea that you would get a master's degree, a master's degree in design was unheard of 40 years ago. And now we get PhDs. So there's a huge transformation, and also even an event like this and this whole enterprise of workshops, the development of workshops, international workshops, of moving around. So I think there's a big transformation. But what's interesting, at least in this last 60 years or even 100 years, is that within the context of architectural education, the notion of developing an individual has been fundamental. That what we're developing are individual egos that become the designers. And so when you talk about interdisciplinary, you end up having to fight what you've just spent 5 years building up, which is the individual as the center of all knowledge and decision, in order to then somehow become somebody who exchanges, while the very fundamental act of being an architect is being part of a team and working with consultants. So, I think some of the discussion about interdisciplinary is actually about consultancy and teams. So my question would be whether a more maybe profound notion of interdisciplinary would be, and was mentioned here just a little while ago, was the point at which when you're working, you move out of your discipline through conversation as opposed to maintaining the consultancy silos that form a normal notion of a team and development. So that is, interdisciplinary is not about just we all know what we do and we work together, because that's really teamwork and consultancy. Interdisciplinary to me would be to go back to having that uncertainty about my role because something is awakened by somebody else's work or else's thought process.
Fantastic. I think if it's all right, we'll end on that note that has called into question our models of teaching over the past years and has, I think, gives us a lot to think about in terms of options for the future. Where should we go? Chris, you want to say something? All right, Chris,
I say one last thing. Look, what we need in teaching is rigor of thought. I think rigor of thought is something that we're always looking for. We teach folks how to use tools. We have our own design schools, but it's the rigor of thought that has to come out through the educational process. Yeah. The other thing I just want to say is one day I hope that I think we'll succeed with all of this when architects want to have people in the pictures of their buildings and of their places.
Okay, great.
When that happens, this will no longer be a real dialogue about whether we're relevant to society or not, because we care enough to have the people we serve in our pictures.
Right,
and the last one, most controversial, I really do think we're only going to need half as many architects or engineers 10 years from now.
Okay. Chris, thanks. Thank you to the panelists. I turn it over to Deep now.
Please stay for 1 more minute. I would like to thank all of our speakers of today, and I think we had a very thank you for sharing your opinion with us. It has been a great, very dense and challenging day, and I would like also to ask you to be here tomorrow at 10 o'clock for the third panel discussion called Collaboration Between Architecture, Education and Non-Academic Partners, which will be moderated by Henk Oving. And now I would like to invite all of you to the opening of the exhibition of Matthias Klotz, just next to this room in our gallery, and the exhibition is called The Poetics of Boxes. And last but not least, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope you have many more inspiring talks in continuation of this great day. Thank you very much.